I run my fingers across the cool glass of my corner office window, 47 floors above Manhattan. Not bad for a woman they said would never make it in this industry. The skyline stretches before me, a concrete testament to ambition and power. My name etched in gold on the door behind me. Olivia Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer *. My phone vibrates against my desk, a text from my assistant, he's here. Three simple words that send a jolt of anticipation through my body. I straighten my Armani blazer and take a deep breath. The endgame I've spent 3 years orchestrating is finally here. I wasn't always this calculated. Once I was just another marketing director who believed in loyalty, hard work, and the myth that excellence would be rewarded. That woman died on a rainy Tuesday in November, the day Douglas Warner fired me to install his incompetent nephew in my position. #I the betrayal *. Restructuring is necessary in this economic climate, Douglas had explained, not quite meeting my eyes as I sat across from him in the conference room. His signet ring flashed under the fluorescent lights as he slid the severance package toward me. Your contribution to Warner Media has been significant. I didn't touch the folder. I increased department revenue by 38% last quarter. And we appreciate that, Liv, we truly do. His practiced sympathy didn't reach his eyes, but sometimes companies need fresh perspectives. Like your nephews, the words escaped before I could stop them. Douglas's smile tightened. Tyler has an MBA from Wharton. That his father paid for while he pulled a 2.7 GPA, I checked. I leaned forward. I built the Richardson account from nothing. They specifically requested me for their international expansion. Tyler will handle the transition. Douglas stood, indicating our meeting was over. The severance is generous, 6-month salary, I suggest you take it. I remained seated, the innovation pipeline I developed. Is company property, he interrupted. Everything you created while employed here belongs to Warner Media. He gestured toward the door. Security will help you pack your office. The humiliation burned like acid as I was escorted out, carrying a cardboard box of personal items past colleagues who suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. 12 years of my life, nights, weekends, canceled vacations, a postponed wedding that eventually fell apart, all sacrificed for a company that discarded me like yesterday's coffee. Rain soaked through my blazer as I stood on the sidewalk, watching droplets hit my leather shoes. My phone buzzed, a text from Jard in accounting. Tyler's already measuring for new curtains in your office. I'm sorry, Liv. Something crystallized in me at that moment. A coldness that settled into my bones, replacing the shock and hurt with something far more dangerous, clarity. I flagged a taxi, Marriott on Lexington, please. I didn't go home that night, couldn't face the emptiness of my apartment. Instead, I checked into a hotel room and spread the contents of my personal laptop across the king-sized bed. While Warner Media owned my official work, they didn't own my mind or the innovation I'd been developing separately on my own time with my own resources. The Blake Protocol wasn't just a marketing strategy. It was a revolutionary algorithm that predicted consumer behavior with unprecedented accuracy. I'd named it after my grandfather, whose chess strategies had taught me to always think 5 moves ahead. I'd kept it separate from Warner's systems, developing it on weekends and late nights at home. Douglas had no idea what he'd just thrown away, but he would. I opened my contact list and found the number for James Richardson, CEO of Richardson Global. My finger hovered over the call button. This wasn't just about finding a new job. This was the first move in a much longer game. I took a deep breath and pressed call. #Roman 2, the planning. I'm sorry to hear about Warner Media, James Richardson said, his Boston accent pronounced over the restaurant's ambient noise. Their loss is potentially our gain. I sipped my water, careful to maintain my composure. I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice. You doubled our ROI last quarter. I'd be a fool not to hear what you have to say. He leaned forward. Douglas mentioned his nephew would be handling our account now. Tyler Warner, I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral, recent Wharton graduate. James snorted. I've met the kid at company events, more interested in the open bar than business strategy. He studied me. What are you proposing, Olivia? I opened my portfolio and slid it across the table. The Blake Protocol, a proprietary algorithm I've developed that increases conversion rates by an average of 62%. His eyebrows lifted as he flipped through the preliminary data, and Warner doesn't own this. Developed independently on my own time with my own resources, I have the documentation to prove it. James whistled low, and you're bringing this to me instead of shopping it around. I respect loyalty even if others don't. I met his gaze directly. I'd like to establish Mitchell Consulting and work exclusively with Richardson Global to implement this system. The results will speak for themselves. And Warner Media will notice when their biggest client suddenly takes their $200 million account elsewhere. A slow smile spread across James's face. You don't strike me as the vengeful type, Olivia. I prefer strategic, I returned his smile. Douglas Warner taught me a valuable lesson about business. I'm simply putting it into practice. We shook hands over dessert and Mitchell Consulting was born. Within 6 months, the Blake Protocol had increased Richardson Global's market penetration by 47%. Their competitors noticed. My phone began ringing with offers. I was selective, choosing only clients who had previously worked with Warner Media. With each new contract, I was careful to offer positions to Warner's best talent, the overlooked workhorses who, like me, had given everything to a company that didn't value them. Marcos, it's Olivia Mitchell, I said into my phone one evening, calling Warner's most talented data analyst. How would you feel about a 40% raise and actual recognition for your work? By the end of the first year, I'd poached 17 key employees and 12 major clients from Warner Media. My apartment in Tribeca became Mitchell Consulting's first official headquarters, with a growing team of 28 employees, all former Warner staff who brought their client relationships with them. I kept tabs on Warner Media through industry newsletters and former colleagues. Their stock had dropped 18%. Douglas had implemented 3 rounds of layoffs. Tyler Warner had lost the Jacobson account after showing up intoxicated to a presentation. They're bleeding out, Jard told me over coffee. He joined Mitchell Consulting as CFO 3 months after I left. Douglas is looking for investors, but no one's biting. The company's value has tanked. I nodded, feeling nothing but cold calculation where Hurt had once lived. What's their current market valuation? About a third of what it was when you left. Why? I smiled. I think it's time to expand Mitchell Consulting. That evening, I called James Richardson. I need investors for an acquisition, I stated without preamble. Must be something significant if you're calling me directly, he replied. Warner Media is failing, I want to buy it. The silence stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. That's ambitious, he finally said. It's strategic, their client list is still valuable even if their management isn't. This feels personal, Olivia. Business is always personal to someone, I countered. I built half those client relationships, I know how to salvage them. Another pause, how much do you need? 40 million, I have 12 million in cash reserves. James chuckled, you've done well for yourself. This is just the beginning. 2 weeks later, I sat across from 5 investors in Richardson's boardroom, outlining my acquisition strategy. By the end of the meeting, I had commitments for 53 million, more than I'd asked for. They believe in you, James said afterward, so do I. I didn't tell him that belief had nothing to do with it. This was about calculation, probability, and executing a strategy that had begun the moment Douglas Warner had underestimated me. #III the execution. Warner Media's headquarters looked smaller somehow as my town car pulled up to the entrance. I adjusted my Cartier watch, a gift to myself after Mitchell Consulting's first million in profit, and nodded to my attorneys flanking me on either side. Remember, I said quietly, no matter what theatrics Douglas employs, we stick to the terms we've outlined. The receptionist's eyes widened as I crossed the lobby. Ms. Mitchell, we weren't expecting. I have an appointment with Mr. Warner. My smile didn't reach my eyes. He's expecting my attorneys, though perhaps not me personally. As we rode the elevator to the executive floor, I thought about the scared woman who had left this building carrying a cardboard box in the rain. She was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that power isn't given, it's taken. Douglas's assistant scrambled to her feet when we emerged. Ms. Mitchell, the meeting is still happening, I finished for her. Please inform Mr. Warner that his 2 o'clock is here. She disappeared into his office, emerging moments later looking flustered. He'll see you now. Douglas Warner had aged a decade in 3 years. The stress lines around his mouth had deepened, and his hair had thinned considerably. He stood behind his desk, flanked by 2 men I recognized as Warner Media's general counsel and CFO. Olivia, he managed, his surprise poorly concealed. This is unexpected. Is it? I placed my briefcase on his desk and extracted a folder embossed with Mitchell Consulting's logo. I believe your financial situation is exactly as expected when you prioritize nepotism over competence. The CFO flinched, Douglas's face darkened. If you've come to gloat. I've come to buy your company, I interrupted, sliding the folder toward him. Mitchell Consulting is prepared to offer $37 million for controlling interest in Warner Media. The room went silent. Douglas stared at the folder as if it might bite him. That's impossible, he finally sputtered. You don't have that kind of capital. Apparently I do, I gestured to the folder, along with the backing of 6 major investors, including James Richardson, whose business you lost when you handed it to your nephew. Douglas snatched up the folder, flipping through the offer with trembling hands. The CFO leaned over his shoulder, his expression morphing from skepticism to shocked recognition as he scanned the numbers. This is a hostile takeover, Douglas growled. No, I corrected him. This is the market responding to poor leadership. Your company is worth a third of its value from 3 years ago. Your clients are leaving. Your talent is hemorrhaging to competitors. I paused, primarily to me. Douglas slammed the folder down. You orchestrated this. You poached my employees, stole my clients. I offered better service and recognized talent, I cut in. That's not theft, it's capitalism. We're not selling to you, he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. The CFO cleared his throat. Douglas, maybe we should discuss. No discussion needed, Douglas snapped. This meeting is over. I checked my watch. That's unfortunate. I had planned to keep most of the staff after the acquisition. I gathered my briefcase. I suppose I'll just meet with your board directly. They might be interested to know I'm offering to preserve 70% of current positions while the next highest bidder is proposing to retain less than 40. Douglas's face paled. There are no other bidders. Martinson Group submitted an offer yesterday, I replied. 29 million, they plan to strip the company for parts. This wasn't entirely true. Martinson had expressed interest but hadn't formalized an offer, but Douglas didn't need to know that. The CFO whispered something in Douglas's ear. The general counsel nodded grimly. Douglas slowly sank into his chair. The board votes on acquisitions. Yes, they do, I nodded to my attorneys. We'll see ourselves out. The offer expires at 5 p.m. Friday. As we turned to leave, Douglas called out, You won't get away with this, Olivia. I paused at the door and looked back at the man who had once held my career in his hands. I already have. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I spent the morning reviewing final acquisition documents with my legal team, then met with Mitchell Consulting's leadership to outline the integration plan. If the board accepts, we'll move quickly, I told them. I want our best people ready to step in and stabilize client relationships immediately. My phone rang at 4:17 p.m. The Warner Media Board had voted 8-2 in favor of accepting our offer. By 9 a.m. Friday, the paperwork was signed. By noon, I was back in the Warner Media building, only now I owned it. I stood in the conference room where Douglas had fired me 3 years earlier, watching as he signed his resignation letter, effective immediately. You'll receive the severance package outlined in your contract, I informed him. It's generous, 6 months' salary. The echo of his words from years ago hung between us. He looked up, years of arrogance crumbling into something like grudging respect. You planned this from the beginning. Not from the beginning, I admitted, but certainly from the moment you decided my contributions were disposable. And Tyler has already cleared out his office. I couldn't resist adding his performance reviews were less than significant. Douglas gathered his personal items into a box, the irony not lost on either of us. As security waited to escort him out, he paused. I underestimated you, he conceded. Yes, I agreed, you did. The rain had stopped by the time Douglas Warner walked out of the building he had once ruled. No taxi waited for him, no severance package could rebuild what he had lost. I turned away from the window and faced the conference room table where the new executive team of Warner Mitchell Media waited for my instructions. Let's begin, I said. #Roman 4, the aftermath. 6 months after the acquisition, I stood at the podium during the company rebranding ceremony. Behind me, workers unveiled the new logo, WM Strategy Group. Today marks not just a new name, but a new direction, I told the assembled employees and press. One built on recognizing talent, rewarding innovation, and valuing loyalty. The applause washed over me as I cut the ceremonial ribbon. Cameras flashed. Former Warner employees who had weathered the transition looked on with cautious optimism. My original team from Mitchell Consulting stood tall, many now holding executive positions they had earned through merit rather than connections. Later at the reception, James Richardson approached with 2 champagne flutes. Congratulations, Olivia, from consultant to CEO in 3 years, impressive even by my standards. I accepted the champagne. I had excellent investors. We had an excellent return. He clinked his glass against mine, though I sometimes wonder if the money was secondary to your motivation. I smiled, business is business. And revenge is best served as a profitable enterprise, I finished. He laughed, what's next for the formidable Olivia Mitchell? I gazed around at what I had built from the ruins of humiliation. Expansion, there are other companies with similar leadership problems. Anyone specific in mind? I thought of Tyler Warner, recently hired at Preston Media despite his track record. I have a few ideas. That evening, I returned to my corner office, the same one that had once belonged to Douglas. I'd redecorated, removing all traces of its former occupant, but kept the view. From 47 floors up, Manhattan glittered with potential. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You've made your point. Perhaps we could discuss a truce over dinner, Douglas. I deleted the message without replying. Some people never learn that power, once surrendered, is rarely regained. I turned back to the quarterly projections on my desk. WM Strategy Group was projected to exceed its targets by 22%. The Blake Protocol was revolutionizing our clients' market approach, and the company culture had transformed from fear to innovation under leadership that recognized excellence. This wasn't just revenge, it was reconstruction. I had built something better from the ashes of betrayal, something that would outlast the satisfaction of watching Douglas Warner carry his belongings out in a cardboard box. I closed my laptop and stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through the glass. The woman who had once stood in the rain, wondering how she would recover from such a public failure, was unrecognizable to me now. In her place stood someone who had learned that the most sophisticated revenge isn't about destruction. It's about creation, building something so successful that those who discarded you must watch from the sidelines, powerless, as you surpass everything they thought you capable of. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, 47 floors above the street where my journey had begun. Some call it revenge, I call it justice. Either way, I was just getting started.